the the graph, the figure shows the downward shift, shift of the supply curve by the amount of the subsidy. The shift downwards. Therefore, it intercepts the world price at the P1 and P2, and it is equivalent to imposing the tariffs at the imposing the tariffs on the world price. So after the downward shifting of this supply curve, if the government subsidize the import substitute producer under the same price level, the domestic producer want to supply more, and the supply curve shifts downwards by the amount of subsidies. The equivalent subsidy doesn't provide the domestic producer with producer surplus that is equivalent to the tariffs, but compensate high costs for additional production. That is, the government expenditure is denoted by ABCK, that square rectangle. If the domestic if the domestic consumption of goods doesn't bear the loss of the excess, the loss JCK, the JCK is the difference between subsidies expenditure ABCK and additional producer surplus ABCJ. So which can be taken as the cost of transferring goods from foreign low-price supply to domestic high-price supply. From the welfare perspective, the production subsidies are more attractive than the tariffs and the quota. If the consumer is a taxpayer, the consumer surplus losses is less than in the case of subsidies borne by the consumer than the tariff and the quota. And from the perspective of matching the benefit and the cost, an industry's production costs should be borne by its industry's beneficiary. If the industry development of a country is beneficial for the whole country, the protection of the industry is taken as a worthy and appropriate. The protection policy should be borne by the public as a whole rather than the direct consumers of the commodity. The export subsidy can be considered as an export counter tariff, while the domestic producer enjoys the subsidy and the consumer suffers the loss. And next, we'll give idea about what is the naive industry. The protection of naive industry is fundamental for the trade protectionism. The theoretical basis of the trade protectionism is grounded by the German economist Friedrich List in 1841 in his literature named National System of Political Economy, and it inherits the first Alexander Hamilton's protectionism idea, who who was the first Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. So this idea is based on the fact that economic development of Germany at that time was relatively behind that of the UK. Conclude from the large number of subsidy studies that a free trade theory of the Smith, Ricardo, and others started from the great harmony of the world, without taking into account the difference among countries. Although there are benefits to the free trade between countries with similar economic levels is mutually beneficial. But in the practice, it is not necessarily beneficial to the relative backward countries. So the free trade should be the future thing. The least theory of the trade protectionism is based on the theory of the productive forces, which believes that the production forces of the wealth or the ability to produce the wealth are more important than the wealth itself. And this believes that in order to understand the economic phenomena, in addition to the theory of value, an independent theory of the productive forces must be considered. The cause of wealth are completely different from the wealth itself. So the ability to produce the wealth is more important than the wealth itself. So let's research the cause of productivity of the wealth. That is the future wealth. And it is studied from the perspective of dynamic production, which is the essence of his thoughts. The gains of the international trades and the tariff policy effect analysis not only focus on the analysis of static interest, but from the angle of the dynamic analysis of the trade's impact on the development, which is the followers the important way of thinking on the tariff policy analysis, and use his income to one of the important way of thinking of the followers. So the relative The list used the model that is different from Ricardo's. That model names the two parents and two types of investment against the Ricardo's two countries and two goods model. It origins from the two landlords with exactly same income and the same number of children, but one of them use his income to invest in the bank and charge interest income from the investments, which conforms to the Ricardo's thought of the pursuit of money. The other landlords will income for their children, use this income to afford their children to go to the college. afford their children to go to the college. And while the children of the after the death, so as an investment in order to improve the ability to produce wealth. After the death of the two landlords, the children of the first landlord will become rich because they have gone into the children of the second landlord of the first landlord would fall into the poverty after using up the savings of their elders, while the children of the second landlord become rich because they have gone to university and has a new means of earning, making of living. Therefore, the list believes that the largest part of the country's national income should be the spent on the education to improve its productivity capacity. Under the protection of the state in the early stage of the construction of the new industry, people will use the inferior but expensive goods. However, after a period of time, people in this country will have good and inexpensive goods to consume, and the country's ability to produce well will be improved. However, after the list believes that agriculture, raw materials, and science and technology should be freely traded because they were productive to the growth of conductive to the growth of the productivity. But the free trade of the industrial products would harm the development of domestic industry. So it's very necessary for the state to intervene in the economic development, and the relative backward country should relatively less developed countries should develop a tariff system that is protective rather than the physical conditional in favor of the promising domestic industry and time limited rather than the time unlimited tariffs in order to develop its economy. In the international trade, the tariffs level should rise as domestic productivity grows, so that domestic goods would occupy the domestic market, but agriculture should not be protected. And his idea on protective system includes